The desert night bit with a ferocity that only the high plains knew, a wind like the claws of a starving coyote tearing across the scrub. It rattled the shutters of the old ranch house, whistled through the cracks in the boards, and carried with it the dry scent of mesquite smoke and dust. The moon rode high, pale and watchful, throwing silver light across the barren earth. That was when she appeared, a woman, barefoot and staggering, her hair tangled by the wind, clutching a weather-beaten satchel to her chest as though it were her very heartbeat. Her dress, once fine enough for Sunday service, was torn at the hem, caked with dust from miles of desperate walking. Each step she took left a fragile imprint in the sand, but her legs trembled as if they might betray her at any moment. Her name was Teena Hayes, and she had walked through hell itself to reach this lonely house. For days she had pushed herself across the desert, moving only by moonlight, keeping away from the main trails. She could not risk the town's riders catching sight of her. Her breath scraped against her throat, each inhalation ragged, but she pressed forward with the single thought that had carried her. There's a man out there who won't turn me away. A man who stands between two worlds. If I can reach him, maybe I'll live. By the time the wooden porch loomed before her, she had nothing left. Teena's knees buckled, her satchel slid from her arms, and she crumpled against the first step, face pressed into the weathered boards. The night should have swallowed her then. But it didn't. A shadow moved. From the doorway stepped a man broad of shoulder, bare of chest, his bronze skin catching the flicker of lamplight. His hair, black as midnight, was tied back with strips of leather falling past his shoulders. Tribal beads and feathers hung against his chest, catching the light, whispering of a lineage both proud and scarred. His eyes were dark, sharp as obsidian, yet within them burned a quiet fire, measured, steady, dangerous. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing whether she was a threat or a burden. The silence stretched, broken only by the moan of the wind. Then his voice came, deep and low, a tone that seemed to rise up from the earth itself. Sleep on the porch or in my bed. The words cut through her exhaustion like a blade. Her head jerked up, strands of hair clinging to her tear-streaked face. She blinked at him, barely able to comprehend. Was this man mocking her, threatening her, or had he just given her a choice? No one else in this godforsaken land had ever offered her cold death outside or warmth within. Teena tried to speak, but her lips quivered. Her throat was so dry no words came. She only clutched the satchel tighter, as if it alone kept her anchored to the living. The man moved then, slow but sure, like a panther deciding whether to strike or shield. He stooped, one powerful arm sliding beneath her frail form, lifting her as though she were no heavier than a child. The smell of smoke and leather clung to him, mingling with the faint scent of sage that seemed carried in his very skin. She gasped at the sudden closeness, at the strength that radiated from him. But instead of fear, she felt something else, something steadier, deeper. Safe. For the first time in weeks, Teena Hayes felt safe. As he carried her across the threshold. The lamplight behind him framed his silhouette, muscular, scarred, resolute. He kicked the door shut with the heel of his boot, the sound echoing in the wooden house like the closing of a chapter she would never return to. The porch, with its biting cold and watchful desert, was behind her now. Ahead lay firelight, shadows, and the unknown. But one truth settled in her chest as her eyelids grew heavy against his shoulder. She had found the man she had been searching for, and he had given her a choice. And though she could not yet speak it, she knew what she chose. The door shut with a heavy thud, cutting off the desert's howl. Inside, Teena was wrapped in warmth and shadow, the fire's glow licking the walls and chasing the chill from her bones. For a long moment, she could do nothing but breathe, chest rising and falling against the stranger's arm as he set her gently into a chair by the hearth. The room smelled of smoke, leather, and sage. Heavy furs were scattered across the plank floor, their hides worn but clean. Rifles leaned against the wall in precise order, their barrels oiled to a quiet gleam. Above the mantel hung a pair of crossed tomahawks, their edges glinting in the firelight. This was no ordinary rancher's home. It was a place shaped by war, solitude, and survival. The man moved with calm efficiency, pulling a clay jug from a shelf and pouring water into a tin cup. His shoulders flexed with each motion, his muscles, corded and scarred from years of battles Teena could only imagine. He offered the cup without a word, his dark eyes fixed on her as though he was weighing something deeper than her thirst. Her lips trembled as she took it. The water was cool and clean, sliding down her throat like mercy itself. A sob caught in her chest, but she swallowed it back, unwilling to appear weak. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then crouched before the fire, tossing another log onto the coals. Sparks leapt up, dancing in the air before dying into smoke. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, pressing down like the desert heat. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. "You carry sorrow in your eyes, Teena Hayes, and sorrow's heavier than any saddlebag." Her heart jolted. How did he know her name? He turned, meeting her startled gaze with a calm certainty. Word travels. A woman runs from Abilene, alone, carrying nothing but a satchel. Folks notice. His eyes flickered to the bag clutched against her lap, especially when men are hunting her. Teena's fingers tightened around the satchel until the leather creaked. Fear clawed its way back into her chest, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. The warrior's expression was unreadable, yet there was no cruelty in it, only patience. A sharp patience that demanded honesty. Her lips parted, but no words came. The firelight blurred through her unshed tears. At last she whispered, "I had nowhere else to go." For the first time, something softened in his face. He leaned back on his heels, the fire's glow painting bronze light across his chest. "Most folks head east when they're hunted," he said. "You came here. Why?" Teena swallowed hard. The truth burned inside her, heavy and dangerous. She wanted to tell him, to spill every secret the satchel carried. But the memory of her husband's death stopped her, the crack of the gun, the blood in the dirt, the silence after. Her jaw trembled. "Because I heard you never turned the lost away." The warrior tilted his head, studying her with a long, searching gaze. His black hair shifted with the motion, beads and feathers glinting in the firelight. "That's true enough," he said quietly. Then, after a pause, "But the lost sometimes bring trouble to my door." The air thickened between them. Teena lowered her eyes, ashamed, terrified of the storm she had dragged into this man's home. Yet he had not cast her back to the night. Not yet. The fire cracked, sending a shower of sparks into the chimney. Teena's exhaustion pulled at her, heavier than any weight she had ever carried. She swayed in the chair, the satchel slipping against her knees. The warrior rose and pulled a heavy fur from the wall, laying it across her shoulders. His hand lingered a moment on the fabric, close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin, but never crossing into presumption. His nearness carried both strength and restraint, a man bound by codes she could not yet read. "You'll rest here tonight," he said firmly. "Come morning, we'll see what shadows follow you." Her chest ached at his words, gentle but final. She wanted to argue, to explain, but sleep pulled her like a tide. Her eyelids drooped as the warmth of the fire and the heavy fur wrapped around her dulled the sharp edges of her fear. The last thing she saw before surrendering to darkness was him, Jace Tall Elk, half Comanche, half frontiersman, and all the strength of the desert night standing in the doorway, watching the storm outside. His silhouette was framed by lamplight, shoulders squared, rifle within reach, and Teena knew even in her drifting dreams, that she had stumbled into a house that was not a home, not yet. But it might become one if it didn't burn down around them first. The fire had burned low, leaving only red embers that pulsed like the last beats of a dying heart. Teena stirred from uneasy sleep, the heavy fur still draped around her shoulders. For a fleeting moment she forgot where she was, but then the memory of the desert, the satchel, and the warrior came flooding back. Jay's tall elk stood by the window, motionless as a carved statue. His rifle rested against the frame, his eyes fixed on the night outside. The only movement was the slow rise and fall of his chest, calm and unshaken. Teena's breath caught. He hadn't slept at all. He had been watching, guarding, like a wolf at the edge of campfire light. Before she could speak, the silence was broken. A knock came hard, deliberate, rattling the very frame of the door. Not the kind of knock that asked permission. The kind that announced claim. Teena's heart leapt into her throat. The satchel nearly slipped from her lap as her fingers clenched around it. Jace did not flinch. He lifted the rifle in one hand, working the lever with a smooth motion that spoke of long familiarity. The metallic click echoed in the small room. Then, without looking back at her, he said quietly, "Stay put." The knock came again, louder this time. A voice followed low, rough and edged with cruelty. "Evenin', tall elk. Open up." "Where?" "Here for the widow." Teena froze, her blood turning to ice. She knew that voice. The warrior moved to the door, opening it with deliberate calm. The lantern light from the porch spilled inside, revealing 3 men standing in the dust. They wore the faces of the town she had fled. Ranch hands mean-eyed, whiskey-breathed, their boots scuffed from long rides and dirty deeds. Each carried a pistol at his side, hands resting too casually on the grips. Behind them, horses snorted in the dark, stamping hooves against the hard ground. The tallest stepped forward, a sneer twisting his lips. His hat shadowed his face, but Teena could never mistake him. Cal Vernon, the foreman of the richest ranch. In Abilene, the same ranch where husband had worked, bled, and died. "Got ourselves a long ride tonight," Cal drawled. "But it'll be shorter if you hand her over. She's carrying something that don't belong to her." Jace's gaze was steady, unreadable. "She's under my roof now." The other men chuckled darkly, spitting tobacco into the dirt. One of them thumbed the hammer of his revolver just to hear the click. Cal smirked, stepping closer until the porch creaked under his boots. "Don't matter whose roof she's under. She stole from her boss. Ran off like a thief in the night. We're just talking her back." Inside, Teena's breath came fast and shallow. Her knuckles whitened on the satchel. She wanted to scream that it wasn't theft, that the book inside was the truth, that her husband had died for writing it. But her voice caught in her throat, strangled by fear. Jace glanced over his shoulder for the briefest moment. His dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw a silent message. "Do not move. Do not speak." He turned back to the men. His voice came quiet but sharp, like flint striking steel. "She stays. Cross that threshold and you cross me." The ranch hands shifted uneasily. There was something in his tone, something ancient and unyielding, that made the night itself seem to pause. But Cal Vernon only laughed, his teeth flashing in the lamplight. "Don't go playing hero. Tall elk. You know how this works. She's worth nothing to you but trouble. And trouble has a way of burning down houses like yours." Teena's chest tightened. She had brought this upon him. This man, this warrior who had lifted her from the dirt and given her warmth, was now staring down death because of her. The standoff stretched, silence thick as the desert heat. Coyotes howled in the distance, as if mocking the men at the door. The smell of sweat and gun oil filled the air. Finally, Cal leaned closer, his sneer twisting into a snarl. You got till dawn, tall elk. Hand her over, or we'll come back with more than 3. He spat into the dirt, turned on his heel, and swung into his saddle. The other 2 followed, their laughter trailing behind them like poison in the night. Hooves thundered off into the desert, fading into the howl of the wind. The door creaked shut, the lock sliding into place. Jace lowered the rifle but did not set it down. His jaw was tight, his chest rising with steady, deliberate breaths. Teena rose, trembling, clutching the satchel to her chest. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to." Jace cut her off with a look sharp, but not unkind. "You don't need to explain tonight." He set the rifle against the wall, but his hand lingered near it. His eyes burned like the coals in the hearth. "Tomorrow, you will." And Teena knew the storm was only beginning. The fire had died to faint embers, leaving the house in a hush broken only by the restless groan of the desert wind against the walls. Teena sat hunched on the chair, her satchel clutched so tightly against her chest her knuckles ached. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the rafters made her jump. Across the room, Jace Tall Elk cleaned his rifle with steady, deliberate strokes. He worked in silence, his expression carved from stone, but the weight of his presence filled the space like thunder waiting in the clouds. Teena finally broke. "I should leave," she whispered. The warrior looked up, his eyes catching the faint glow of the coals. "If you step outside tonight, you won't make it 10 yards before those men find you." His tone wasn't cruel, it was simply fact. She swallowed, the lump in her throat tightening. "I don't want to bring ruin on your home. I didn't come here to drag you into my trouble." He set the rifle aside and leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. The firelight traced the hard lines of his chest, the tribal beads and feathers shifting against his skin. "Trouble was already at your heels when you walked onto my porch. Now it's mine too." The finality in his voice both terrified and steadied her. Teena drew a shaking breath, then loosened her grip on the satchel. She had carried it like a lifeline, yet its weight was crushing her. Slowly, she set it on the table between them. Jace's eyes never left hers. "What's inside?" Her throat tightened. Memories surged. Her husband, bent over their kitchen table by lantern light, scribbling into the ledger with calloused hands. His voice low and urgent. "If anything happens to me, Teena, you take this book. Don't let them bury the truth." She forced her trembling hands to open the satchel. From within, she drew a worn leather-bound ledger, its pages swollen with ink and sweat, corners frayed by fear. She placed it carefully on the table, as though setting down a piece of her soul. Jace reached out, turning it with deliberate care. He flipped a page, then another. His eyes scanned the names, the figures, the notes in the margins. His brow furrowed. "These are accounts." Teena nodded, tears threatening. "My husband kept the books for Vernon's ranch. He saw everything, the stolen land deeds, the bribes to the sheriff, the miners cheated of their pay. He wrote it all down." Her voice cracked, breaking into a sob. "And when he confronted them, they killed him. Shot him down in the dirt like he was nothing. Then they came for me, thinking I'd burn the ledger. But I couldn't. It's all I have left of him, and it's the only proof." Her words hung in the silence like smoke. Jace closed the ledger slowly, his fingers lingering on the cover. His face remained unreadable, but his eyes dark. Searching held something softer now. "You ran with the truth," he said quietly. Teena wiped her cheeks with trembling hands. "And now the whole town's after me. Vernon owns the sheriff, the judge, half the ranchers in Abilene. If they get this book, it'll be like my husband never lived. Like none of it ever happened." Jace leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the door as if he could see the desert beyond, already thick with enemies. "That's why they want you. Not for you, but for what you carry. Teena nodded, guilt tightening in her chest. I should never have come here. They'll burn your house, kill you, just to silence me. But Jace only shook his head. His long black hair slipped over his shoulders, beads glinting in the lamplight. They threatened me tonight. Men like Vernon think fear is stronger than truth. He looked back at her, his voice steady. They've never met someone who's lost everything already. The words sank deep, pulling the breath from her lungs. Teena stared at him, unsure whether to weep or cling to that strength radiating from him. For the first time, she wondered what ghosts haunted Jay's tall elk, what wounds had carved that steel into him. The silence stretched until the wind rattled the shutters again. Teena shivered, pulling the fur tighter around her. What happens? Now, she whispered. Jace's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Now, they'll come with more than threats. At dawn, maybe sooner. You'll need to be ready. Teena's chest clenched. Ready for what? His gaze burned like the embers in the hearth. Ready to fight or to run. But whichever choice you make, Teena Hayes, you won't face it alone. The ledger sat heavy between them, its pages whispering of blood and truth. And as the desert wind howled outside, Teena realized she had not just found shelter, she had found an ally who was already binding his fate to hers. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was at their door. The night deepened, heavy with silence broken only by the crackling fire and the restless whinny of horses tethered outside. Teena's heart still raced from what had happened earlier, when the ranch hands had tried to force their way in. If it hadn't been for him, the warrior standing, firm in the doorway like a wall of unshakable stone, she didn't know what her fate might have been. The man, whose name she had only heard whispered once in passing Cale, moved with the quiet assurance of someone who feared nothing. He had said little since the ranch hands rode off into the night, leaving only the bitter promise that they'd return. Now he leaned his rifle against the wall and crouched by the fire, tossing. In another log, sparks flared, casting long shadows that danced across his broad, scarred chest. Teena sat curled on the bench, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of water, though she hadn't taken a sip. Her eyes followed him in silence, studying the lines of his face. His jaw was strong, sharp, and the firelight painted gold along the strands of his long black hair. The tribal jewelry across his chest and arms glinted faintly small beads, leather bindings, feathers that carried stories she couldn't yet know. Finally, his voice broke the silence, low and steady. "You should sleep," he said, not unkindly. "Tomorrow will test you more than tonight." Sleep. The very word seemed impossible. Teena clutched her satchel tighter, the leather soft and worn beneath her fingers. She shook her head. "I can't, not yet." Cale's eyes met hers across the flickering firelight, and for a moment, the world outside, the threats, the dark desert, the dangers pressing and seemed to fall away. He studied her, not like a man studies a woman, but like a warrior reads the truth of someone's soul. "What are you running from?" he asked quietly. The question pierced deeper than any blade. Teena's lips parted, but the words tangled in her throat. She wanted to tell him everything about the men who wanted what she carried, about the lies that had followed her across the prairie, about the secret she bore like a weight too heavy for her small shoulders. But all she managed was a whisper, "Men who will never stop hunting me." Cale did not move, but his eyes narrowed slightly, sharp as an eagle's. He seemed to already know. "Then you cannot face them alone." His certainty startled her. Alone was all she had ever known. Even in towns full of people, she had always been an outsider. The thought of leaning on someone, of trusting a stranger, let alone this warrior who had saved her, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. And yet, something in his presence steadied her. "I don't want you to get hurt," she murmured. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hurt and I are old friends." Teena exhaled shakily. For the first time, her fingers loosened from the satchel. She set it gently beside her, though she never let it stray far. Her eyes drifted toward the door, where shadows whispered beyond the wood. "Do you think they'll come back tonight?" Cale shook his head, long strands of black hair shifting over his shoulders. "No, they've run to gather more. Men like. Then don't retreat without numbers. They'll return with others at their back." The fire popped, and Teena felt the floor tilt beneath her. More men, more guns. The thought made her tremble, but Cale's calm tone cut through her fear. "You'll be safe here," he said. His words were simple, but they held a weight that made her believe them. For the first time since she had stumbled onto the porch of this lonely ranch, Teena allowed her body to rest back against the bench. Her muscles ached, her eyes heavy despite the storm inside her mind. Cale rose slowly, the movement quiet and graceful, and fetched a blanket from the corner. He handed it to her without a word. When her fingers brushed his, she felt the calluses on his hands, the proof of a life lived. Hard, and her breath caught Dot as she wrapped the blanket around herself. Cale's voice rumbled low, almost like a promise. "Sleep on the porch if you fear me, or here, by the fire, or—" His eyes lingered on hers for a beat. "You can sleep where you will not wake alone." Her heart thundered at the meaning unspoken. The choice lay heavy in the air, suspended. Between them, Teena pulled the blanket tighter, trying to still her trembling hands. She had been running so long, trusting no one. But tonight, with the fire crackling low and the shadow of danger pressing outside, her heart whispered a dangerous truth. It might be safer in his arms than anywhere else in the world. The storm raged through the night, battering the ranch house with wind and rain. Thunder shook the earth like the growl of some vengeful god, and each lightning strike painted the land in stark white fire before fading back into blackness. Teena sat by the hearth, her hands trembling as she held her satchel. The flames snapped and hissed, throwing long shadows against the log walls. Her thoughts raced like wild horses. Had she brought this danger upon herself, or was fate simply cruel enough to follow her wherever she went? Outside, the warrior man stood unflinching on the porch, bare skin shining under the storm's fury. His long black hair streamed like a river in the wind, his tribal jewelry rattling softly with each gust. The rifle in his hands was steady, as if molded into him by years of battle. He was a silhouette of strength, a figure carved out of stone and spirit. When the first horsemen appeared out of the storm, Teena's breath caught in her chest. Their torches glowed faintly through the sheets of rain, wavering lights like lanterns, carried by ghosts. She rose to her feet, clutching the back of the chair for balance. "They've found me," she whispered. The warrior did not move, but his voice cut through the storm like a blade. "Stay inside. No harm will come to you." Something in the way he said it, the certainty, the vow soothed the tremor in her bones, even as the riders drew closer. The men dismounted near the corral, their boots splashing in the mud. Teena could see their outlines now. Broad hats, slick oilskin coats, guns at their hips. These were no ordinary travelers. They moved with the weight of purpose, the kind of men who carried threats like rattlesnakes carried venom. One of them called out over the roar of rain, "We know she's in there. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way." Teena's knees weakened, and she nearly fell. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "They'll kill me?" The warrior man stepped off the porch, bare feet sinking into the wet earth, rain running down his chest like molten silver. He raised the rifle, its barrel glinting in the lightning. "She is under my protection," he thundered back. "If you want her, you come through me." A tense silence followed, broken only by the storm. The riders shifted, exchanging wary Glances. They hadn't expected to face a man like him, shirtless in the cold, defiant in the dark, standing as if the world itself could break against him, and he would not bend. Inside the house, Teena pressed her hand to her mouth, her tears hot against her chilled skin. Never in her life had someone stood for her this way, with no thought of what it might cost him. One of the riders spat into the mud. "She's not worth dying for, stranger. You don't know what she's done." The warrior's eyes burned. "I know enough. Leave now, or the storm will not be the only thing you fear tonight." Lightning split the sky again, and for a moment the men saw the raw power in his gaze. Some shifted uneasily, their courage faltering. But one taller, broad-shouldered stepped forward. He drew his revolver, aiming it squarely at the warrior's chest. Time slowed. The rain hammered harder, thunder cracked, and Teena let out a strangled cry. The warrior did not flinch. His finger brushed the trigger of his rifle, his muscles coiled like a panther about to spring. The storm itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first shot to ignite chaos. Then, in a voice low but sharp as a knife, the warrior spoke again. "I will not ask you twice." The standoff stretched, thick as smoke. The rider's leader hesitated, his gun still raised. But the storm's fury and the warrior's unshakable stance bore down on him like a weight too heavy to carry. Finally, with a curse, he holstered the weapon. "Not tonight," the man growled. He signaled the others, and slowly, grudgingly, they mounted their horses. Their torches bobbed away into the dark, swallowed by rain and thunder until they vanished altogether. Only then did the warrior lower his rifle. He turned back to the house, rain cascading down his body, his chest rising and falling like a drumbeat of survival. Inside, Teena collapsed into the chair, sobs breaking free. When he stepped through the door, dripping and fierce, she looked up at him as if seeing him for the first time, not just a stranger, not just a protector, but something more. "You risked everything," she whispered. The warrior closed the door against the storm and met her gaze. "No," he said softly, kneeling so their eyes met. "I risked nothing. They never had a chance." The fire popped in the hearth. Outside, the storm still raged. But inside, something stronger had taken root. For the first time in years, Teena felt safe. The sun had barely lifted over the desert horizon when the riders appeared in full black silhouettes against the fire-colored sky. Dust swirled behind them, a living storm that promised trouble. Teena's breath caught in her throat as she clutched the doorframe, her knuckles white. The night had been long, full of whispered prayers and the sound of boots pacing across creaking floorboards. Now morning light revealed what the darkness had concealed. 20 men on horseback, armed and determined. Beside her, the warrior man stood unmoving, his bare chest gleaming in the early light. His long black hair caught the wind, strands glinting like obsidian. Beads and feathers shifted across his shoulders, and the faint rattle of bone ornaments spoke like warnings on the breeze. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood, breathing slow, calm, as though the whole desert belonged to him. "Is it them?" Teena whispered, her voice trembling. He gave the smallest nod. "Yes, men who hunt not for justice, but for fear. They come for you, but they must pass through me." Teena's stomach turned to ice. "There are too many." The warrior cut her short with a glance, steady and sharp. "Numbers are nothing. A river does not count the stones before it carves its path." His words, firm and grounding, carried a weight she couldn't deny. The riders halted about 30 yards from the porch, their horses stamping the ground, nervous from the scent of gunpowder and sweat. The leader, a broad man with a scar crossing his cheek, raised a hand. His voice carried across the open space. "Send the woman out, and we'll leave this place standing." Teena shivered at the venom lacing his words. The warrior lifted his rifle and rested it across his forearm, his posture relaxed, yet commanding. "She stays," he said simply, voice deep and unshakable. A tense silence followed, broken only by the restless whinnies of horses. Teena's heart raced so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. She could hear her pulse pounding in her ears. The warrior, though, was still as stone, carved from defiance itself. The leader spat into the dirt. "Then you've chosen." "To die with her?" The first gunshot cracked the morning, sharp as thunder. Teena screamed, ducking back into the doorway. But the warrior had already moved swift, precise. His rifle barked, smoke curling upward as a rider toppled from his horse. In an instant, chaos broke loose. Horses reared, men shouted, gunfire split the air. Teena clung to the wall, her eyes wide with terror, watching the warrior become something both terrifying and magnificent. He moved with the fluidity of a predator diving, firing, reloading in movements so fast they seemed rehearsed by a lifetime. His muscles flexed with every shot, long hair whipping in the wind, beads and feathers dancing as though the spirits themselves guided his hands. Dust filled the air, choking and blinding. Teena coughed, but her eyes never left him. He was a storm given flesh, and each man who charged him fell back in defeat. Yet still, the riders pressed on, numbers threatening to overwhelm. One man broke from the pack, charging the porch with pistol raised. Teena cried out, but the warrior spun, dropping the attacker with a single shot before he could even aim. Another leapt down from horseback, rushing in close. Teena's breath froze too close for the rifle. But the warrior dropped it, seizing the man with his bare hands. The sound of bone snapping echoed like breaking wood. The man fell limp. It was over almost as soon as it began. The survivors fled, horses kicking up clouds of dust as they galloped away into the desert, their cries fading into the horizon. Silence returned, heavy and unreal. The warrior stood in the center of it all, chest heaving, skin glistening with sweat and smoke. The ground around him was littered with the fallen, the smell of gunpowder thick in the morning air. Teena stepped forward on shaking legs. She didn't even realize she was crying until the warrior turned toward her, his face softened, his eyes dark and endless locking with hers. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "You saved me," she whispered. He set the rifle down gently, as though it were nothing more than a tool. "No," he said, voice low, almost tender. "You saved yourself the moment you chose not to run." Her chest ached, not just from fear, but from something deeper, something she hadn't felt in years. In that moment, she knew the truth. She wasn't alone anymore. The warrior stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow that fell over her like a shield. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers surprisingly gentle for hands that had just wielded such violence. "You have a choice still," he murmured. "Sleep on the porch or in my bed." His tone carried neither arrogance nor command, only quiet certainty. An offering of safety she could feel in her bones. Tears blurred her vision as she exhaled, trembling. Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "With you?" "With your arms around me." And for the first time in years, Teena felt safe enough to let the dawn rise, safe enough to breathe, safe enough to dream.